And joining us this week is Karl Moore from the Desautels Faculty of Management at McGill University in Montreal. Dr. Moore is the author of dozens of books and articles about business, economics, and globalization. And he interviews movers and shakers from the business world in his weekly video column called Talking Management for the Globe and Mail, Canada's national newspaper, and now on the air with the CEO series. CJAD Radio in Montreal, and I guess other stations across Canada as well. Welcome back. It's good to see you again.
Nice to be here, Tom.
Over the years, we've enjoyed talking with you because year after year, I guess for 7 or 8 years now, you've taken students from McGill around the world. You call it your Hot Cities World Tour, appropriately enough, and you go and visit countries and cities to basically, I guess, see how the economies are doing there. And I'm sure you pick economies that are dynamic and interesting. And so this year, your Hot Cities tour took you to Indonesia and Hong Kong, and you're just back from that trip.
Yeah, in fact, we went to Doha for 8 hours and Hong Kong for 2 days, Jakarta for 4, and Bali for a day and a half. The slogan of the trip is taking the future to the future. That is young people to where the world economy is seeing a lot of growth. And so we've been to, last year was Mongolia and Seoul, the year before Russia, South Africa, India, UAE, and Israel. So we've got a long history of looking at where's there high growth, so we can take undergraduates to go see that growth and try to understand why that growth is occurring in those particular countries.
Why did you choose these particular cities this year?
Well, when you look at, partly is that Indonesia is one of the fastest growing countries in the world in terms of that. It's the 4th largest. It's the largest Muslim country, so that's an interesting take on it as well. And to get there, there's no direct Montreal-Jakarta flights. So the fastest way of getting there was through Qatar Airways, through Doha. So spent 8 hours there with alumnus who went to Russia with us, and her parents hosted us at their home. We had the Canadian ambassador, a producer from Al Jazeera, chairman of a company, a car racer, bunch of alumni show up for a 4-hour dinner, had a tour of the Pearl, then got back on the plane and spent 2 wonderful days in Hong Kong. So it was an opportunity to kind of, rather than sit at the airport and just have dinner and have a drink, we thought we'd go out there and explore in a bit. So it's a thin slice, but fun to do that.
And when you get to the cities, do you meet primarily with CEOs of major corporations in those cities?
That's probably the biggest group. We saw 30 executives in the course. We also met with 2 ambassadors from Canada, people from the UN World Food Organization. We met with and raised money for a charities we've done the last 5 years in the trash heaps of Jakarta, where we went to the school where the children are, and it's literally in the trash dumps is where the school is, where the children and their parents live. Raised, I think we're up to close to $5,000 now to help provide for there, but also to say it's not just privileged people from one of the world's great countries, a number of Americans with us and Brits and so on. We want to give back a bit. So, but the main focus is to understand business over there. We met with Ogilvy, the great advertising firm, about how do you market differently in Indonesia, particularly as the world's largest Muslim country versus back in North America. We look at how do you manage differently there than you manage in other parts of the world, because it brings so many of the classes of the students to life and see it in the real world happening, rather than just looking at it in a textbook.
So they also get a real taste of the culture and the civilization there. And
yeah, I mean, it's something where we do some cultural things, talk to some local people, try to get a sense of what's happening there from entrepreneurs, from World Economic Forum movers and shakers we meet with most years. So it's a sense I mean, it's only 11 days, but we're trying to give them a thin slice of it to get a sense for it. But also at age 20, to stir up an appetite, a desire in the future to go and visit more remote parts of the world, and see that as, for a number of them, may end up working in some of these places, and it kind of opens up their minds to say, yeah, I could go work there for a few years, bring back that to Canada, the US, or France, wherever I'm from, with just a bigger, broader view of the world.
And that leads right into my next question. What the students get out of this? They get not only exposure to these global markets, but as you said, experience that they can truly use once they leave McGill.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, reading the reflection journals, which is part for those who take it as a course, they reflect back on what are the 3 or 4 key learnings they got from it. So each one is individual. And I hear the voice of the student reading it aloud to me, because they're writing it to themselves in 10 years, if you would, but I happen to be listening in and get to know them well. We have 33 meals together, so I have a sense for them more than I do in a classroom in Montreal. And they reflect on many different lessons. One of the young women talked about how some of the alumni kind of took her aside and suggested some ways she could improve, and she agreed with them but pushed back a little bit. So I ran her yesterday on Sherbrooke and said, appreciate, one, that you agreed with them, but appreciated that you pushed back, that you're not from this part of the world, so you can approach things a bit differently. So each one comes back with different lessons that they learn from it. Kind of the meta lesson is there's a big world out there. I want to be part of it.
Some of the first classes are almost getting to that 10-year mark now. Have you talked to any of them, and are those lessons truly lessons that they've carried on now through their business careers?
Oh, I think so. I mean, like I have lunch with most of them when they're in town if they don't live in Montreal. Some of them gave to our charity that we raise money for in Jakarta, so keep in touch with them. I'm a reference for most of them as I get to know them in a way that they don't get to know many other professors. And there's a selection process, so they're great people. It's not hard to be a reference for these young people. And it's great to hear, reflecting back on the trip, what they got from it, and how it encouraged them to lead life a little bit, perhaps a little bit more chutzpah than might have otherwise.
You have been jetting around Canada and other parts of the world for both the Globe and Mail now, and also your new radio show, which we'll talk about in a little bit. For your Talking Management, your video columns that appear weekly on the Globe and Mail's website. You've been talking to business leaders around the world for several years now.
About 8 years now, yeah. So one week I do a CEO, and the other week one of the leading business profs in the world, which I do at the Academy Management, 27 interviews in 3 days. But it gives me a chance to talk to CEOs in probably about 12 countries now. And it's fascinating. On this trip to Indonesia, we talked to, in Hong Kong and in Doha, and in Bali, a bunch of CEOs about how do you lead, and what are the issues you're facing with? Is leadership different than 10 years ago? And the answer around the world seems to be that leadership is different than 10 years ago. Less hierarchical, much more women involved, much more being open to younger people's opinions, rather than just letting the older people run things and tell young people what to do. So I see a shift there, which is happening in countries around the world, not just the US and Canada.
You talked about Indonesia being one of the fastest growing economies in the world right now. When you talk to CEOs around, what's their assessment of where we are post-recession, or is there still great concern about Europe and what's happening there, and whether that's going to drag down the entire global economy?
Well, certainly they're concerned about Europe, and as a certain amount of they go, it's great to be somewhere where there's growth. There's great to be where the world's going forward, where you look at 15, 20% growth is not unusual in a market sector. Where in Europe, I was there doing McGill events last year in London, Paris, and Geneva, very much a different feeling, unfortunately. And so the other thing that struck me is that I asked the head of a big consulting firm who looks after Southeast Asia, and his partner is also in Jakarta, and I said, which is more important in this part of the world, China or the US? And they literally laughed at my foolishness. And they said, absolutely China, in a way that 10 years ago wasn't true. And that's fair enough, it's their part of the world, but in some ways I would encourage Washington to make sure that they pay enough attention over there, because there's so much growth, there's so much opportunity. American and Canadian business people should be over there, and particularly the American and Canadian governments, to influence it and provide a counterbalance to China. I mean, China is a great country in many ways, but I prefer the American system to the Chinese communist system. That's something really struck us over there, how much China, and we saw it last year in Mongolia and Korea, China is just this big weight over there, and not so much America's decline, but China's just grown in importance. Makes me slightly nervous.
And we hear so much about the ongoing crisis in Europe, though, and whether we've entered a second recession there, and everything that's happening in Greece. I guess Greece is the poster child with the austerity measures being taken there. Is that, do you see light at the end of the tunnel there, or do you just see that as a crisis that doesn't seem to have any resolution right yet?
Well, I think it will be resolved eventually, but you look at some of the underpinnings, things like demographics, not enough children, and aging society in many of those countries. You look at enormous debt, you look at a lack of entrepreneurial spirit, which the US certainly and Canada has much more than they do. Where, I mean, the UK has some of that, but when you look at continental Europe, Germany's doing well, and Holland and the Nordic countries, but it's something where it's almost structural, and it's going to take a while for those things to turn around and reset themselves. So we're saved, the US, Canada, Australia, the UK, by immigration, where they don't have the same degree of immigration. We're not having as many children similar to them, but we have immigration to save it. Now it's changing the face of Montreal, Toronto, Vancouver, and the big US cities as well, where it looks different than it did a generation ago. And that's wonderful. I'm just not sure if Europe has a great way to go through this in a way that's going to lead them back to the growth they had in the 70s and 80s.
Let's talk a little bit about the economy in Canada. Of course, whenever you're here, we love to talk cross-border business. In Canada, we are seeing, at least compared to the U.S. and the dollar, the exchange rate at about 80%, 20% exchange rate right now. Are you seeing that that's having much of an impact on business between Canada and the U.S. or Canadians crossing the border? Obviously, where we are, the area relies so much on people coming from Canada across to visit or go shopping or spend a couple of days.
Well, exporters, it helps, like Bombardier, because it means that they can sell their product and pay the wages are the same wages, but they're less relative to what you're selling in US dollars. It certainly discourages a bit of tourism down here just because, it costs 20% more than it did a year ago. That's going to impact you. And the economy in Canada, and the head of the Bank of Canada has talked about this recently, and I was in Alberta 2 weeks ago, where oil price being down has impacted the Alberta economy considerably and therefore knock-on effect to the Canadian economy. It's helped in Ontario and Quebec lower energy prices. But overall, the Canadian economy slowed because of that. And we'll see what happens over time as the price goes up. We have mixed feelings. We'd like it to go up from a viewpoint of our economy, and environmentally, it's better to have a higher price. On the other hand, as a consumer driving down here, it's a lot cheaper to fill up. And we, and parts of the U.S., fracking has helped the economy. Now, environmentally, is it safe or not? Quebec and I believe New York have taken a different perspective than other states in the U.S. We'll see over time, but certainly it helped the U.S. become an energy superpower and taken a lot of pressure off the states relative to other parts of the world.
Have relations between the U.S. and Canada been strained by the failure to approve the Keystone XL pipeline here, which would bring oil from the Alberta tar sands down through the U.S. to refineries on the Gulf Coast?
Yeah, I think it has a bit, but our relationship is so strong that it's a blip in the relationship, and who knows what the new president in a couple of years will decide to look at it. So I think it's a blip. We're just such close countries. When I come down to the States, I pass for an American. Generally, people might assume you're American, but you could pass for an English Canadian, something where we're just the two closest major countries in the world culturally, that it's a blip. You can never separate the two of us.
Much of the oil that you mentioned, the hydrofracking that's going on in North Dakota, the Bakken oil fields, is coming through Canada now to reach markets in the U.S., coming up over through Canada, down across the border and down here along Lake Champlain. Millions of gallons daily now being transported. A lot of speculation that the tar sands oil will start taking the same route, that if they can't get the Keystone XL pipeline, they'll use a moving pipeline and use rail. Here in the States, there's been quite a bit of concern about the increase in train traffic. Much the same in Canada, or since it directly impacts the economy there greatly, is there less resistance to the vast number of trains that are now moving this oil from the west and Midwest to the east?
Oh, a huge concern. You remember what happened in Quebec.
Yeah,
we know it very well, and it's well known across Canada. It's something where it's just much safer to go on a pipeline. And so there's a sense of we'd support a pipeline. There's mixed feelings, particularly in Quebec. We have Hydro-Quebec, we have relatively green power. Maybe we're a bit hypocritical about it, but it's something where there's a tremendous concern about oil in general, particularly from the sands of Alberta, the environmental impact that it has. And we're nervous about the trains because we've seen the accidents occur. Pipelines are better, but enormous amount of money and a long-term commitment to bringing oil from somewhere and sending it somewhere else. So there's mixed feelings about it in Canada, and particularly in Quebec.
Canada way ahead of the U.S. at this point as far as cracking down regulations on the oil trains, as far as phasing out some of the older tankers and requiring them to be retrofitted, getting that done much quicker than the U.S. is at this point right now.
Well, it's a huge part of what how we move oil around, and we're a big oil producer. Huge country. We have two major railroads, so it's CN and CP, CN headquartered in Montreal, CP out in Calgary, where it's a bit easier in a sense to put your arms around it because there's two big players. And, they know the government knows them well.
You mentioned hydropower. Premier Couillard was in Vermont just a few weeks ago and talking about exporting more hydropower from Quebec to Vermont, other New England states, and New York. Is that a big future especially for Quebec, do you see?
Oh yeah, we love it because it's a greener power. The dams, they did move Aboriginal peoples and so on. Some issues there, but a lot of those, the dams there has been for years. It's green power and it provides us US dollars, which is very, very good from a Quebec viewpoint. And it helps us with our deficit and some of the things we're wrestling with in Quebec. So it's all great when we can do that.
2 projects on the fast track would actually bring it down across the border underneath Lake Champlain. One line would head for Metro New York, the other would head for New England to transport hydropower that way, and those projects seem to be moving ahead.
Well, so I sat down with Thierry Vandal, who's the CEO of Quebec Hydro, a couple of weeks ago. He's stepping down May 1st, but we had a conversation about that. He came to class this year as well. And it's something where this is really helpful to Quebec economy, and it's something where there are a few environmental issues, but relative to oil, it's a pretty green power, and one where we're blessed with a lot of big rivers that fall over hills, and it's more complex than that, but it's something where we have that, and it's great we can ship it to our southern neighbors.
Obviously, such a close relationship between northern New York and Quebec. We see a number of Canadian companies that have located just on this side of the border, especially the transportation industry here in the Plattsburgh area, Clinton County. We see growth since we had you last on the program. Nova Bus has brought Prevost down and expanded the line here as far as the buses that they're building, their primary customer, New York City and the Metropolitan Transit Authority there. Bombardier's rail division down here, of course, both huge employers for the Plattsburgh area. Both seem to be doing well as far as expanding into the U.S. and building products for mass transit systems across the U.S.
Well, partly it's, there's a local content requirement of government, so that fits. The other thing, it's so close. I mean, it took me an hour and a half to get here from downtown Montreal, so it's very easy for us. And it means that you can not worry about the border. So I know some companies that make suits, for example, Jack Victor in Montreal, and they store them down here because they can have them in New York City in 6-7 hours and don't have to worry about the border because they handled that before. So it's a great relationship. And again, a lot of Canadians are flying out of Plattsburgh, out of Burlington airports. I mean, they advertise it as Montreal's American airport. Right. And particularly from the South Shore, you might as well come down here and go through customs at the border rather than do it at Trudeau, where something where, and I know we see so many Vermont and New York plates, particularly on the weekend in Montreal, it's the local big city, New York and Boston a lot further away. So it's something where we watch your TV, you come and buy our stuff, and there's a real sense of strong connection between Vermont, New York, and Quebec and Ontario as well.
You talk about the travelers. Is Trudeau and some of the other airports around Montreal, are they not happy about the amount of traffic that now heads south of the border to use the airports in the U.S.?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Jim Cherry runs the airports in Montreal. It's something where they're losing business down here, and they don't like that, but that's, a natural competitive spirit. On the other hand, there's an opportunity there in expensive parking, less expensive flights. So it's a challenge to Air Canada and to airports in Montreal to say, can you compete with that? And the consumer is largely the winner. So that's our system. And Air Canada right now has been quite profitable, unusually profitable. They've, the last 10 years, made profit probably 3 years. So it's nice they're making some money, but they could reduce prices. And at a certain point, if that happens, we're all winners.
And up to this point, nobody's really come up with cheaper flights out of Canada that can compete with the flights that are taking mostly Canadians to the sunny south and vacation destinations.
Well, part of it's the fees that Plattsburgh charges. And when you look at low-cost carriers, they want to go to second-tier airports that are inexpensive, that have cheap parking for the consumers. And Plattsburgh wants to woo those, where Montreal does as well, but it's a much bigger airport. It's not going to give what low-cost carriers might want to get from Plattsburgh. So, from that viewpoint, it's a different kind of offering. But when you're flying to Europe from down here, you'll probably go through Montreal because we have better connections around the world. We have a flight to Doha. We were on flights to Frankfurt, London, Paris, Amsterdam. But if you want to go to Florida and get some sun, Plattsburgh's a nice choice.
Although the charter airlines that are running these flights, offering these flights, certainly are looking at the expansion at Plattsburgh's airport right now, $50 million expansion, with the eye toward international flights, the Caribbean and Mexico, again, primarily Canadians looking to send them on vacation destinations, and now looking to expand to those destinations in the coming years as well.
I talk to people where they point out for a family of 4, it's hundreds and hundreds of dollars cheaper. And depending where you live, it's really not much distance. Parking is so cheap, more power to you. if we can get some sun in the winter, which is just dragging on and on, we love it.
Exactly. The airline industry is one of your areas of expertise. In recent weeks, we've seen that Bombardier has been doing test flights for the CS300 series, now their largest commercial flight, and they are hoping to get that project back on track. That's a number of years behind schedule, way over cost, and they're hopeful that they're going to be able to make that a profitable wing of Bombardier.
Well, the C Series, it's almost 3 years late now, a couple billion over, but at this point they're committed. It'd be absolutely nonsense to say we changed our minds. And we're months away from it being certified by the Canadian government and being able to be delivered early next year to the customers, all being well. But as you get further and further along that process, there's less and less chance of something going bad because you've had so much testing, you've gone through the major systems. So pretty optimistic there. I think in the medium to long term, this may well be the feather in Pierre Baudouin's cap when he retires many years from now as his greatest contribution. But in the short term, it's been painful. Thousands of people laid off, billions more spent, a cash crunch. They seem to have settled that out. There's rumors that they might sell off Lear or Transportation Division or some other part of it. You remember they sold off Recreation under Paul Tellier 4 or 5, 6 years ago now. That's something the new CEO Alain Bellemare is looking at. But I think the C Series is something they're absolutely committed to, and I think will be a great success in time. A lot of hard lifting before that occurs.
Have we heard just recently, though, some of the first major airlines to commit to buying the C Series? Qatar Airways, one of them, now deciding that it's just taken too long and they're going to look for their planes elsewhere?
Yeah, I mean, it's something where what Alain's doing, and a lot of the senior people out there beating the bushes, looking for customers, absolutely going after, and Alain came from Pratt Whitney, many years with them, knows the airline industry extremely well. He's out there calling them, Pierre is himself as well. They're looking to grow that customer base. Part of it is that the A380 was, 2.5, 3 years late. The 787, the Dreamliner, is late. So the industry is going, we're a bit gun shy. We'll believe it when we see it. So get it in the air, get it approved, get someone using it, and I think that will be helpful to get more orders in. They're out there looking for orders now, and every month of the testing approves, orders are more apt to happen. But it's, I think, short-term some continued pain, but medium-term, I think it'll be a great product for Bombardier and for Montreal's economy.
And in the meantime, their bread and butter for a number of years now has been the regional jets, and they're continuing to commit to that and looking to build hundreds more of those regional jets. So the company is still doing well with that division.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the regional jets has been down a bit. When the C Series is done and the biggest amount of investments done, I think they'll be looking at some investments in the regional jets after the C Series is put to bed, if you would. Then you'll see them. Embraer is the biggest player in the regional jet. Bombardier's got a huge install base. We'll come back to that with greater force. They're out there marketing it now, and they have improved the product in terms of fuel economy, things like that. I think there'll be more reinvestment in the RJ in the future.
An agreement was signed a few weeks ago between the U.S. and Canada. It's been talked about for a number of years. It basically calls for pre-clearance for customs. And for example, if you're in Montreal and you want to take the train to Albany or New York City, before you would have to stop at the border for customs. It could take an hour, 2 hours, slow that trip even more, several hour trip as it is. Now by having pre-clearance customs right at Central Station in Montreal, do you see that being a boon for Amtrak and possibly Canadians looking for rail travel to get down into the States?
Yeah, I mean, look at it. I have a number of friends I've never done it. I've taken the train to New York. Today it's too long. I mean, it's a beautiful part of the country to go through, wonderful mountains and everything else, but it's just too long. If you get rid of an hour or two of that, it becomes more attractive. Wi-Fi, and you get a lot of work done. So it's good from that viewpoint, but it's just too long today. A couple hours less will become more attractive. To really get trains widely used to be high speed like we see in Europe between Boston, New York, Washington, Montreal, Toronto, that's where it would really take off. But if you save a couple hours, I'd be tempted to take the train, and more people would. But it's still tough to compete with airplanes in terms of speed.
We were talking a little bit about the exchange rate and cross-border business. We've seen a number of retail stores closing in Canada, and the Target store in Plattsburgh was almost a hit for Canadians coming across the border and shopping here before Target expanded into Canada, buying out Zellers and also opening about 130 stores across the country. But within a few short years, already announcing that they're closing, and I think within a few weeks we're going to see all those stores closed.
Oh, I mean, it's amazing because partly why headquarters of Target thought they'd do so well in Canada was Canadians love Target in the U.S. So I think they overexpanded, got in over their heads in some way. They also had supply chain issues where they simply didn't get the product. So the one near our house at Alexis Nian, there was empty shelves at times, which is a kiss of death in retail. Yeah. And it was something where they didn't quite get the product offering right, that it's a bit different in parts of Canada. I mean, upstate New York and Quebec would be fairly similar, but it'd be very different than Texas, for example. So I think it was overexpansion and supply chain issues, and then just not quite getting it right, I think is what led to the demise of Target. It's also that I think a new CEO had to make a dramatic move to prove that he was the right leader. And so I think that may be an element, a little bit of hubris in there, but that's between you and I. I mean, but we look at other ones closing. Future Shop is closing down, and about half their stores are closing, half are becoming Best Buy, which owns Future Shop. Yeah. I think the central issue there, Tom, is that people are buying online more and more. And what is the right mixture of bricks and mortars and online is what a lot of retailers are wrestling with. And as consumers, we're evolving. When you look at, talk to some people that own BMW, Mercedes dealers, and they're redoing those dealerships because people are absolutely doing their homework before they come to the dealership. Something we would ask a salesperson 10 years ago, we already know. And so the relationship is changing as we use the web, whether to purchase or just to do our research. It's dramatically different, and retailers are trying to sort out what all that means. Now, Amazon is opening some small stores. So it's kind of going both ways, and it's just a mixture that retailers are really wrestling with at this particular moment.
And also Future Shop's probably at one time the largest electronics chain across Canada, probably also feeling some pressure from Walmart and Costco and some of the other stores that are probably underselling them or pricing TVs and electronics
Absolutely.
cheaper.
And it's the other thing, which is the idea was to have dual banners. 15, 20 years ago, you often have dual banners where we assume they're fierce competitors, and we didn't realize they're owned by the same company. So Best Buy and Future Shop, both owned by Best Buy, but we had assumed they were fiercely competing with each other, but they were owned and working together. That idea seems to be kind of long in the tooth now and doesn't seem to be working or as needed as it was, and it's an expensive thing to do. And they did have a bit of a product differentiation, a little bit more high-end at Future Shop. They also paid commission to the salespeople at Future Shop versus salary, and so that works for some people, particularly if you're from a country as an immigrant where they hassle, they haggle rather, not hassle. Where you're used to that, other people didn't like that, so they tried to differentiate, but the cost of doing that, having a dual banner, just doesn't seem to make sense in the marketplace as it did 10 years ago. And I think that's part of why they closed them down as well.
We're also seeing some stores close that might surprise a number of people. High-end department stores. Ahold Renfrew, you mentioned, in Canada closing some of its department stores.
Well, I mean, it's certain still in Montreal and on Sherbrooke, but it's closed down in Quebec City and in Ottawa because they didn't see that they weren't making money from them. There wasn't the demand there. But you see Saks, I believe, is moving into Canada. Toronto, Holt Renfrew is doing well in Toronto and Calgary and Vancouver, but it depends on the particular marketplace where the luxury high-end is getting a bit more crowded with Saks coming in. And I heard rumors Nordstrom's as well, which are great brands, love them, love shopping there. I'm in New York or in other parts of the States, but it makes it tougher on Holt Renfrew and Ogilvy's and some of the other big names in Canada.
And we'll ask you about, so many people travel north from here and come to the island, taking the Champlain Bridge. We've seen the new designs for that beautiful bridge. We hear the target date of 2018. We're already at 2015. Is that realistic? Has work even started on that? And does that seem like a project that can be done that quickly? Is it that much of a priority for Quebec, or is this a project that probably will be years potentially delayed?
Well, it's a federal rather than a provincial responsibility. Okay. It's owned by Canada. There's some work that's being done. It just seems, given what's, for example, Super Hospital is late.
Right.
When we look at big projects in Canada, we could be better at delivering on time. So it seems a bit optimistic, but we're very hopeful because that's the most busy bridge in Canada. It's hugely important to the Montreal economy, people commuting, people coming up from the States and us going down there. Really hope it's done as soon as possible, but it's going to snarl traffic, one suspects, in a big way until it's done.
Are they building right alongside it, right in the same spots?
Yeah, they're building just to the side of it, I mean a bit off, but it's something where they've already done some of the construction, some of the roadways, getting ready for that. About 3 miles from there is the Turcotte Exchange where the new super hospital is. They're redoing that. They're destroying some houses in our neighborhood to move it over. So they're starting to work on that. So 2 mega projects a few miles apart. One hopes it works out well.
And we will wrap it up by talking about your new radio series, and that's just in addition to the video column you do. This is CJAD, our friends up at the News Talk Radio in Montreal, and appropriately enough called the CEO series. And this is where you're really traveling not only across Canada but beyond to talk to top CEOs.
Well, something where we do mainly in Montreal, but I'll be doing some in Toronto. I did one, the CEO of WestJet in Calgary a couple weeks ago, going down to the Silicon Valley at the end of April to interview a CEO on stage in front of McGill alumni in the Silicon Valley, and also down to her perspective. So it's one where we're doing it for our radio show across the country, but also for McGill alumni as a networking event and a chance for them to pick up from often a McGill alumni themselves, but we're not too worried about that. Chance to learn from a CEO and hear from them and their perspective and their take on, in this case, the Silicon Valley. We'll be doing events planned in Vancouver and Toronto, New York, London, and Paris over the next year. So fun chance to go out there and see McGill alumni around the world. Just always a pleasure.
And radio stations across the country actually picking it up.
Yeah, it's spreading across the country. We're trying to get more guests where, like I'm trying to get Jeff Molson because we drink his beer and we watch his team, and every Canadian would be interested in someone like Jeff Molson. So we're trying to get more that everyone in the country and some of our American friends as well.
And I'm sure a number of Americans would be interested in Jeff Molson, owning the Canadians and of course the Molson Brewery. And it's great. You actually sit down for a good 45 minutes or so with these CEOs and really talk about their pathway to success. And do you find that maybe not being the journalist, the typical journalist, that they open up to you about strategies and maybe stuff that other interviewers wouldn't get from them?
Well, one hopes it's recorded, so if there's something you don't like, we won't use it. And it's also, most of them have come to my class where we spend an hour and a half talking with them and I, and then with students as well joining in. So there's a sense of I'm closer in their age. I'm not there to say what's happening in the share price, but to more step back and talk about leadership and management and how do you manage millennials. Finishing a book on introverts. Are they an introvert? How do they manage introverts in the executive suite? So it's something it's a different kind of conversation than they typically have. Hopefully they enjoy it. I certainly enjoy it.
And oftentimes you would think that maybe CEOs are elusive or hard to get. Have there been some that have been a real challenge for you to be able to get to sit down and do this interview with me?
Yeah, some have just said no, they're not interested right now. Which is fair enough. Like some are new to the job and want to have a bit more time before they talk. Others are just more apt to be, I just don't want to talk about my private life and keep it private, which is fine. But I think people stop me and say they really enjoy, how do you keep in shape? How do you manage your work-life balance? How do you get away? Or kind of questions where we'd like to hear about it. These are people that are well off and can afford to do things, but they share some of the same things we worry about, putting weight on and keeping in shape. Very demanding job, so it's interesting conversations. People say that's the part they seem to enjoy the most.
The CEO series is heard on CJAD in Montreal, also online, so folks can simply go online and listen to them all there. So that's wonderful. And every time you come down, we'd love to talk to you about what book you're writing now. And you just mentioned from millennials to introverts. These are some of the topics that you've been tackling recently.
Yeah, two. But one is I'm almost done. I've said this for a couple of years, but it's true this time. On how do you manage millennials? Essentially what we're arguing is people already 45 with the university degree were taught a modern worldview. People under 35 with the university degree have been taught a postmodern worldview, therefore it must be managed differently. We have 6 short chapters on how to do that. And the book I'm working on now, interviewed former CEO of Bombardier Aerospace yesterday about it, is the academic literature suggests all leaders are extroverts, which is silly. And I've interviewed about 150 CEOs, and about 25 to 30% of their C-suite executives in companies over 10,000, so big companies, are introverts and tend to happen more in finance, in IT, in operations, where starting out it's more about analysis and data and thought, so it tends to draw introverts, at least in the past. Now, marketing tends to get more extroverts, but with big data, I think we're seeing a switch there. Some of the people that are going into marketing, all of them have got to act extroverted at times. So one of the CEOs talked about, who's an introvert, said that when he leaves his floor, he has got to put on his game face and act like an extrovert.
Yeah.
So what I argued is that as an extrovert, when I leave my office, I don't have a floor, I've got to act like an introvert to be a more effective leader, listen more, not quite demand the spotlight as much as I would normally, in some ways, grow up, allow other people to have the spotlight, and allow other people's ideas, not just mine, to dominate. So what we're saying is that introverts have great strengths. As an extrovert, I can learn from it. And introverts agree there's great strengths to extroverts. So some introvert executives have got to kind of act that part and be a bit more energetic, to talk a bit more, because that's the role that's required of them. But we're learning from each other. And so that's been fascinating to talk to 150 so CEOs about their C-suite. About a quarter of those CEOs are introverts, which surprised me as an extrovert, but in retrospect, shouldn't have been surprised at all.
And that's interesting. I bet a perspective that a lot of people never thought about, but important, obviously, in this day and age.
Well, the kind of the big thing to stand back is to say about diversity on your team or in your executive team. It's obviously a lot more women than there used to be, looking at introverts. And I'm arguing is that maybe not on your senior team, but on your team you want millennials, because millennial brings ideas which are, when I was young, it was 98% of mentoring was from them to me. Today, it's about 75% I mentor young people, but 25% of the time they're reverse mentoring me. Things obviously like social media, the internet, where they teach me what's going on. But I think in a world where we need more innovation, part of innovation comes from frontline troops, younger people. I've got to spend more time listening to them to understand my changing world in order to come up with strategies for the future. So I think most CEOs have got to spend time listening more than they have in the past, and being reverse mentored by the millennial generation in order to be effective and to be good money makers.
Dr. Karl Moore, it's always good to see you, and nice to have you come down and visit us. Thank you.
My pleasure, Tom.